Sometimes, leaders are faced with choices that may seem harsh to some, but they make these decisions believing it's what's best for the country. One such decision recently came from Ibrahim Traoré, the widely admired president of Burkina Faso. While many consider him a hero and a strong leader, a recent action of his has stirred debate and even accusations of authoritarianism. So, what exactly happened? A few weeks ago, a doctor in Burkina Faso, known for his work and education, took to social media to criticize the military's efforts in the fight against terrorism. In his post, he suggested that the reason terrorist attacks were increasing was because the soldiers weren't doing their jobs properly. This opinion didn't sit well with military leadership. Soon after the post went viral, the doctor was summoned by a top-ranking general. What followed shocked many. He was handed over to the military, given training, and sent straight to the front lines with a rifle. The idea was simple. If he believed the soldiers weren't doing enough, he could now see firsthand how difficult and dangerous the fight really was. This action sparked outrage among some people who said it was a clear attack on free speech. They argued that no one should be forced to go to war just for sharing their opinion. Others, however, saw it differently. They believed the president and his team were sending a strong message. During a time of crisis, empty criticism without contribution only weakens national morale. To understand this situation fully, we need to look at the bigger picture. Burkina Faso has been battling insecurity and terrorism for many years. Long before Traoré came to power, thousands of lives were lost, and millions were forced to flee their homes. Despite the presence of French troops, who were supposed to help stabilize the country, the situation kept getting worse. After the military coup that brought Traoré to power, he promised change. And unlike his predecessors, he took bold steps to strengthen the military, buy modern equipment, and launch effective operations against armed groups. Many citizens, and even observers from outside the country, agree that significant progress has been made. But not everyone sees things the same way. The doctor believed the progress wasn't enough, and he voiced his frustration online. What followed was more than just a response, it was a lesson, or perhaps even a test of character. Instead of silencing the doctor in a traditional way, President Traoré invited him to his office and ordered his officers to take him to the front lines. Whether you see this as justice or overreach depends on your perspective. The doctor was actually given military gear, handed a weapon, and taken for training. President Ibrahim Traoré made it clear if someone believes the army isn't doing enough, then maybe they should step into the shoes of those on the battlefield. That was his message to the doctor. Since this story broke, a lot of people have been quick to criticize Traoré, saying his actions reflect a dictatorship that silences free speech. But the truth is, people often rush to judge without truly understanding the challenges leaders face, especially in times of war. Since Traoré took charge, the Burkinabe military has seen a remarkable transformation. This is the same army that once relied heavily on support and equipment from other African countries. Now, it has access to modern, high-tech gear and is capable of standing on its own 2 feet in the fight against armed militants. The days of depending on France for security support are slipping into the past. In fact, the military has successfully pushed back terrorist groups and reclaimed territories that were once out of reach. Instead of throwing stones, maybe we should take a moment to recognize how far Burkina Faso has come under Traoré's leadership. While some still insist his approach is harsh or authoritarian, others see it as bold and necessary. After all, when someone publicly questions the army's efforts, especially in a country actively battling terrorism, shouldn't they be given a chance to contribute hands-on? That's exactly what the president offered the doctor. A chance to put his words into action. And this isn't the first time Traoré has made a move like this. Something similar happened in 2024. Back then, certain politicians, mostly those eager to bring back a civilian government so they could enjoy the perks of power, were demanding elections. They accused Traoré of using insecurity as an excuse to delay the return of democracy. They claimed the country wasn't in that much danger and that he just wanted to hang on to power. So what did Traoré do? He challenged their claims head-on. He gave them weapons and sent them to the front lines too. Of course, the Western media wasted no time labeling these decisions as oppressive and anti-democratic. But let's take a step back. In the same year, something else historic happened in Burkina Faso. The country finally bought its own aircraft, something no previous leader had managed to do since independence. That's right. All these years, the country had been renting planes from the West just to keep its national airline operating. Traoré thought it was ridiculous that a sovereign nation didn't even own a single aircraft, so he changed that. He didn't turn to Europe or the US for the purchase either. Instead, he bought the aircraft from China and proudly named it Air Burkina. When the new plane arrived, rather than calling in foreign mechanics to test it, Traoré trusted the talent within his own country. Local Burkinabe engineers were tasked with inspecting and testing the aircraft, yet another statement of confidence in the nation's ability to stand on its own. A group of engineers in Burkina Faso had agreed to test the country's newly acquired aircraft for a specific payment amount previously set by the government. But surprisingly, just one day after this agreement, they backed out. Why? They suddenly demanded an extra 3 million CFA francs on top of what was already agreed. That's quite a move. Even so, President Traoré didn't ignore them. He sent negotiators to talk things through and even offered to raise the payment, though not the full amount they were asking for. But the engineers stood their ground and refused anything less than the total extra amount they demanded. Now, ask yourself, doesn't that seem more like selfishness than fairness? These weren't foreign workers, after all. These were Burkinabe citizens, people who should understand the tough times their country is going through. You'd think they'd be proud to work on the first aircraft Burkina Faso has ever owned, especially one bought without relying on foreign help. But instead of stepping up, they let their greed get in the way. So, President Traoré made a tough call. He said enough was enough and decided the government would no longer negotiate. The work would go ahead as planned, and the engineers would be held to their original agreement. Some might call this approach extreme, maybe even undemocratic. But let's not forget, Traoré is a military man running a transitional government, not a civilian administration. In situations like this, strong decisions are sometimes necessary. It's easy to throw around labels like dictator without looking at the full picture. Traoré wasn't just being strict, he was trying to protect national interests and ensure public funds were used responsibly. And if you're still watching this, chances are you agree that these stories matter. So, why not hit the like button and join the conversation? All right, let's keep going. Now, another big decision Traoré made also happened in 2024. As you probably know, Burkina Faso has been battling serious security issues, with terrorist threats constantly looming. In such an environment, especially during conflict, every soldier's presence counts. That's why Traoré dismissed 2 senior military officers who vanished from their duties for 6 whole days without any approved leave or valid explanation. These weren't just any officers. One of them was in charge of logistics, arguably one of the most vital parts of military operations. Without solid logistics, supplies don't reach the front lines, communication breaks down, and soldiers are left vulnerable. Now imagine, if during those 6 days, a terrorist attack had taken place in a remote village. How would the troops have been able to respond quickly, without supplies or coordination? The second officer, Commander Bello Mamadi, was even more critical. He led Burkina Faso's ground forces, the backbone of the country's military strength against terrorism. Walking away from his post like that wasn't just irresponsible, it could have endangered lives and weakened national defense. This is why Traoré acted fast and removed them from duty. When the country is under threat, there's no room for negligence, no matter how high your rank is. For a country to run smoothly, everyone, including the citizens, must play their part. This is why President Traoré had no choice but to remove certain high-ranking officers. Some may see this as a harsh or even authoritarian action, but the reality is that it was necessary to enforce discipline and show that the military is accountable for its actions. When a group of military officers in Burkina Faso tried to destabilize the country by staging a coup, Traoré didn't hesitate to arrest them and put them on trial. Interestingly, President Traoré wasn't always so strict with his military officers. When he first took power, he faced an assassination attempt and a coup against him. The people behind the attack were from the Burkinabe army, individuals Traoré knew personally. However, despite knowing exactly who was behind the plot, he chose to forgive them instead of taking action. He even mentioned that money had been used to try to buy influence and have him removed from power. But he warned those involved not to fall for such traps. It's not entirely clear, but perhaps this leniency led some to believe that Traoré was a weak leader and that he could be overthrown easily. Nearly a year later, a second coup attempt occurred, followed by a third in the same month. This time, however, President Traoré took a different approach. He decided to face those who had turned against him directly. He launched an investigation, which led to the arrest of 3 soldiers involved in the plot. They were charged with conspiracy, undermining military orders, and threatening national security. Despite enduring a total of 10 coup attempts, President Traoré's leadership only grew stronger with each one. Strong leaders like him are what Africa needs: leaders who are not afraid to make tough decisions. If more African leaders followed Traoré's example, there's no doubt that African countries would improve, with greater accountability for everyone's actions. Since taking office, Traoré has made some difficult but necessary choices for Burkina Faso. First, he had to secure the country's independence by ending the colonial agreement with France, ensuring that France could no longer impose its military presence on the country. As a result, Traoré expelled the French army. What Traoré did takes real courage. Few leaders would make such bold decisions. Previous Burkinabe presidents allowed France to maintain influence, manipulating the country's resources. But Traoré decided to break free from that, charting a new course without French interference. Furthermore, at a time when many African countries were aligning themselves only with Western nations, Traoré took a different route. He acknowledged that Africa had not gained much from its relationships with the West over the years. In numerous speeches, President Traoré has expressed how the West has taken advantage of Africa for its own gain, leaving the continent in poverty. As a result, he made the tough choice to shift away from Western relationships and focus on building stronger connections with non-Western countries. This move has attracted criticism, with some labeling him a dictator for choosing to align with countries like Russia and North Korea. However, Traoré is both a soldier and a visionary, standing firm in his beliefs. Despite the backlash, he remains dedicated to fostering ties with nations outside of the West. Countries like Mali, Niger, and Chad have also followed a similar path. Another tough decision Traoré made was to suspend the coverage of Burkina Faso-related news by Western media. This decision came after a controversial debate aired by the Western network Voice of America on September 19, 2024. The discussion focused on the security crisis in Burkina Faso and its neighbors. However, the Superior Council of Communication, CSC, accused Voice of America of damaging the morale of the troops in both Burkina Faso and Mali. The council took issue with the broadcaster's description of a recent attack in Bamako as courageous, and criticized its coverage of security operations as overly negative. As a result, the CSC announced the suspension of all broadcasts connected to Western media until further notice. Upon examining the CSC's statement, it's clear that the Burkina Faso government had a right to make this decision. Traore's stance exemplifies the kind of leader Africa needs, strong and willing to make tough choices for the greater good of their country, no matter the consequences. Africa deserves leaders who are not afraid to take bold steps. What do you think? Feel free to leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and share this video.